Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
I owe what I get to do every day here in a job I love to many people, but Scott Bryan really helped. In 2015, he took a chance on me to become the VP of Programming at Imagine H2O, running the Accelerator. And it was a learning curve which laid the groundwork for what we do here at BIV. Scott is one of the most important figures in early stage water. Since 2010, he has built Imagine H2O into the premier accelerator for water entrepreneurs, running 3 annual programs, and they announced their first pilot fund last year. All of this adds up to an enormous and rapidly growing degree of impact in water, as the companies they've backed and supported have revolutionized everything from groundwater management to flood insurance. Please enjoy my conversation with Scott Bryan. Scott, this is a big one for me. I really, really appreciate you being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Tom. This was a pleasure and honor to be here.
Excellent. So you have a school of experience that very few people in the sector have. You have been working expressly with early stage entrepreneurs for now 15 years. Sorry to put a number on it, but here we are. So I just wanted to give you space to reflect on kind of the periods of time as you see them. Are there chapters over that 15 years in terms of the development of the water technology ecosystem that you think that kind of people should be aware of? How has this developed?
I think when we started, it very much felt like the kind of end of clean tech 1.0, right before a correction in the market.
Yeah.
But still, there was so much going on in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley in the renewables and what I'd say the clean tech space. And you just saw that ecosystem of entrepreneurs, investors, and then real buyers, utilities lining up and incentivized to buy new solutions, try new things. And a lot of that was rooted in really innovative policy, like the decoupled energy market in California that incentivized efficiency. So that was in the background or really in our face. And water, on the other hand, still did feel like, Sand Hill Road had done a few deals like APT Water and Drip Tech, but it just wasn't the same ecosystem. You didn't see the same capital flows or talent flows into water. And I think back to, I think it was maybe 2008, a friend of mine had invited me to have an X Prize launch event, happy hour for their electric car prize. And everyone was there. There was a prototype Tesla in the valet. There were all the investors, all the talent, just in one cafe in Palo Alto. And that wasn't happening in water. And the sizzle and the excitement and just being able to see the technology, it was just night and day. And I think for a lot of us involved in the early days of Imagine H2O, looking at that and then realizing the importance of water and where the water innovation market would go, there was a bit of a blueprint, but there was also a reality whoa, there's a lot of ecosystem building that needs to happen before we can even begin to get to a place where somebody has their prototype out in the valet.
Totally. So walk us through the earlier stages of kind of putting this together. So we'll talk about the period pre your life being ruined by hiring me in 2015. So just talk us about those formational kind of 5 years. If you break it up into 5-year chunks, what were those kind of initial years like?
When we launched, certainly the business plan, competition, or prize, that was in vogue. That's what everyone did. That's what we did. We said, we're going to just do it on water and we're going to look for commercial viability, nothing else. And I think our process looked at business plans. I think we got very lucky early on, had some nice wins. On the other hand, I don't think we really fully appreciated what kind of the founder and team element were. I mean, those first years, we didn't really meet these people. or interview them the way we do now. So there was a lot that we had to learn, but I think early on, having some names like Fruition Sciences in the ag space, Water Smart Software, Enline Energy, founders that have very relevant experience. They weren't in love with their technology. They were willing to pull stuff off the shelf, mimic what they'd seen in other sectors, and really create the right product or solution for the market. So obviously we got some that were completely off, but you had to take those risks. And really that first 5 years was about proving that there's a there, and there was value in what we were doing as an organization.
Sure, absolutely. Just to stick with that idea of, because obviously this is sort of like where I was for a long time and now is what I do all the time, which is sort of think about the kind of science of like company selection. What is it that we're looking for? Can you just talk us actually through in a little bit more detail, like the evolution of your process? Like you said that you started with the business plan competition, you just sort of, that was what was on the page, you selected the, 2 thumbs up, like, let's go, up to where it is now. Can you walk us through that arc?
Yeah, I think there were some signs very early on. I don't want to pick on anyone. I think we all evolve and learn over time.
Be fun.
But clearly there was an era there where there were entrepreneurs that could win a business plan pitch competition, put together a good plan, and they were good at that. But then when it came to them building a team, selling something, or even manufacturing, that's where I think people they thought they could maybe do it as a one-person show, or the rest would fall into place. But really, you had to be ready to execute on that plan, and not everyone was. I think that's changing. But when I think everyone and their brother was running a business plan competition, you started to see some patterns, and it was like, okay, what's next? And I even remember a venture and an attorney that works with a lot of venture businesses, and she's saying, right now in clean tech, anyone with a high school degree could close a Series A. I was like, okay, that was pretty brutal, but in a way, that's what was maybe happening in those early days for us.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think there's something so specifically dangerous about people who have learned how to go through the motions for a specific part of the fundraising process and do that brilliantly. And then they gain the money and then it all gets set fire too because they can't do the rest of it.
Yeah.
Good argument plus charisma equals sometimes danger. So the second period, 2015 to 2020, the dumpster fire Ferguson. So like, what were the observations there? Because it was a really interesting period of growth for you.
To be honest, those first 5 years, that launch phase, we relied a lot on volunteers, interns. We kind of cobbled together everything. But we built a track record where Wells Fargo came in with a $1 million plus commitment to the organization. We had a very generous family office in Silicon Valley come in at the same time. And then for me, it was go time. Like, we've got to hire the team to really professionalize everything we built. And that's when you entered the picture. Obviously, Nimesh came in, Kelly came in. I think we built a really good team at the right time to really not only professionalize the model, but then show what it could do. And that was also the beginning of the Urban Water Challenge, Imagine H2O Asia, really starting to work and clear verticals and work towards some more direct impact outcomes versus just being you give us $1 million, we'll go support a bunch of entrepreneurs and good things will happen. We started to shift toward a model say, okay, we can take on a specific issue or work in a certain geography and plant a seed where there's going to be some real outcomes, not just for the entrepreneur, but for the people and ecosystems on the ground.
Absolutely. So I want to come back actually to the kind of the impact mechanisms, the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact, right?
Impact engine, Tom.
The impact engine, the theory of change. Yes, great. I'm back into it. But I just want to stick with the arc for just a sec, which is kind of like the 2020 to the present day, because you really have assembled kind of an amazing team and they've done extraordinary things. And it's one of these, I still sometimes talk about it, even though it's quite a long time ago now, is that it's very, very humiliating when you leave an organization and then everything gets infinitely better after you left. Insulting.
No.
Anyway, but yeah, so this last, because I split it in my head into thirds. I don't know whether you do it in the same thing, but from 2020 onwards, what does that felt like?
Well, maybe before we get there, I think quickly back into that phase 2, if you will, some key things happened in the market for us too, and outcomes that very well. But it just felt like we hit kind of this magical few years where Oxymem comes in and they've got two great strategic investors, and then whoop, DuPont takes them over. Valor going to Xylem, Imagine going to Innovize. That those are the things that you have to do as an accelerator to show that you're finding and supporting the right companies, and there's some commercial wins. I mean, behind all of this is we want to create commercially viable solutions that can leverage the power of the market to scale and are not going to be reliant on more artificial market factors. So those were some key wins that I think not only we're going to have more dollars coming to the organization, but at least our industrial partners, the utilities that we worked with, they all saw that there was real value in everything we were doing.
For sure. It was a really, really interesting period of time. And it was those events that really kind of like set the kind of light bulb on of like, whoa, okay, yeah, maybe what we're seeing is the kind of the advent of something pretty interesting happening here. But we'll get onto that in a second. So you're absolutely right. That period of time was so crucial. Yeah, I mean, then from sort of 2020 into the go-go years of 21, 22, difficulties of COVID and up to the minute, like, how do you reflect on that period of time?
2020 was obviously a rocky ride for everyone, but I also felt like we were born during the financial crisis and housing crisis of in 2008, 2009, 10, that period. So I think, and in some cases, we probably managed our organization more conservatively than we should have in those early days. But I think that was certainly in the back of our minds. On the other hand, it felt like, well, if you know what's going to happen on the back end of these things, that's when an organization should really, really be able to thrive. So it was a bit survival mode, but then, telling myself, the team, our board, hey, this is our moment to thrive. It's going to be, tricky navigating all this. There's clearly some things that have happened to the organization where we're going to have to think again. But it was really from that period where we could see the arc towards our Water Innovation Pilot Fund. We could see all the learnings that were happening from the Urban Water Challenge and the Accelerator, and saw a shift towards, okay, companies, there's now going to be a market for more service-based solutions. It's going to be slower than we all think. For one, we're also going to have to be more in tune with what's happening on the workforce side. And that's where great companies like TeamSolve come in. I think we were able to kind of position ourselves in front of where the market would go in some ways, but also innovate our own programming and go beyond what we'd started, which was the Accelerator is an amazing resource for entrepreneurs. But 10 months, that's, if our thesis is, hey, this is a 10, 15-year journey, obviously we got to be thinking beyond 10 months. And I think the 2020 to present period, we've been able to really stand up a series of resources and initiatives and programs that are geared to just do that, to help entrepreneurs really kind of put their solution in the ground and then be able to educate the rest of the market about what they're seeing.
I want to go in about 19 different directions at once. Maybe I feel like my brain just fused, because there's a lot in what you just said. So given that you just mentioned it, and I'll come back to this sort of full service idea that companies can stay with you for. No, in fact, I want to go to the accelerator question, because you just said your program is 10 months, which is pretty extended for an accelerator. And it kind of begs the question, which is, look, okay, Techstars now have their, new cohort of water companies in Tuscaloosa, I think, in Alabama, I believe. Mm-hmm. But the track record of mainstream accelerators working with early stage companies, I mean, Valor was a Y Combinator company, Waterplan was a Y Combinator company. They always kind of come up every once in a while. But in general, historically, let's just say the track record is checkered, and in generally accelerators struggle with water companies. Like, how do you think about that? Why is it that other accelerators, Techstars have done some interesting stuff with, kind of, for example, Zilpa Trentless and Swift Comply and various others. Why do you thrive where they struggle?
I think from the beginning, we've said we're going to just focus on water. Yes, there are times when we bring in mentors or judges from outside the sector, and that's what I think really gives us an edge. But we're very much rooted in the reality that water entrepreneurs face every day. Yes, we've seen companies use those other accelerators to raise money quickly, which can be really beneficial for the right company. If the accelerator has partners in a particular sector and there's linkages to customers that they actually need, then I think that those models can work. But certainly we've had a few of our alumni come back to me and say, I got a lot of value out of that program. I got a lot of value out of yours, but let's measure everything in burritos. And if I gave up a bunch of equity in my company for that few months in that accelerator versus what I got out of Imagine H2O, you've got a lot more affordable burritos, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. And very delicious and humorous. Yeah, exactly. Excellent burrito metaphor. It's awesome. No, yeah, the degree of specialization, I think, but like, definitely don't underplay. I think the expertise that you have inside and outside, the method of selection and the amount of very, very smart people that you bring to bear on your selection decisions is really remarkable. I want to spend some time on that impact engine. So you are, as far as I'm concerned, you're an entrepreneur like anyone else. You just happen to have a different tax code. You're like Gary White, like, building an entity, just different tax designation.
Yeah.
But you do have the kind of the requirement to kind of build an impact engine, whereas the job of some, lowly bottom dweller like myself is that it's sort of, we also have an impact mandate from a subset of our LPs, but really we're here for the returns. That's what we do first. How do you characterize the impact engine now? And how have you thought about it over time as you've evolved it?
I think we went for a long time, just like a lot of entrepreneurs in this space, is the more we do, the better the world will be. But there are limits to that. And I think one of the great things that has happened in the last 4 or so years at Imagine H2O is mapping out 4 pillars and climate, health, equity, efficiency / circularity. Really have 4 pillars that we kind of orient our work toward, but then you've got to measure it. And I think that that's where we have more to do as an organization, but the whole sector does. And I think that there's some fascinating opportunities for us to lead or co-lead that process, because I think there's still a lot of entrepreneurs that say, my solution's awesome, and if the world would be a better place if there are more of them. We say, no, actually, how many gallons you've saved. You know how many GHGs you've saved or helped drive energy costs by a percentage. And I just think that it's a bit of an afterthought still, but I think it's a real evolution that's happening in the market. On the other hand, we need to standardize. And I think what still drives me nuts on the climate side is the math is all over the place. So I think we as a sector, going to need, is it 20%? Is it 10%? No matter, you take the metric or the factoid, and it's just like, okay, that's from 2018. So I do feel like we have to, be more precise about the metrics that we're going to track as a sector, and that we can continue to drive that for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, for sure. The wrangling of it is really tough. And I think what's most exciting when I look at the really amazing portfolio of Imagine H2O is that, like, you're just starting to see, we're invested in a few of them, but you're just starting to see as they scale and as they scale overall as a cohort. I can't wait for your next impact report. The numbers are going to be bananas, and they will continue to be hopefully exponentially bananas as you add more, and the ones that you already have kind of continue to grow. So, as I said, you're an entrepreneur, but you have a different kind of tax designation. How do you think your experience is distinct from other founders? Is there anything that you would say is that, like, okay, this is something that is pretty distinct to somebody who runs a nonprofit?
There's a lot of the same principles at work. And I learn a lot from our founders that I then apply to how we think about the organization. But on the other hand, obviously, there's some real differences as a nonprofit. Everything we do is out in the open.
Yep.
And there's kind of no secret strategy. You can innovate and evolve, but you're not thinking about creating moats. You're really thinking about, how do I improve a sector or a resource and change the world? So there's a bit of a different calculus because of that. But yeah, I'm always thinking about product market fit, thinking about don't run out of cash, the same thing that a lot of our founders do. I would say, more recently, obviously with inflation, a lot of philanthropy doesn't really, they don't kind of adjust each year's grant towards inflation. So it's not like we can raise prices like a founder might. So I think there's things that we have to do as an org that are just in a very different reality than a venture-backed or startup might.
Sticking with the philanthropy side of things, it's obviously to a sort of certain extent what you're providing is kind of an impact product that they're buying into in order to generate the impact that is kind of promised. But again, with a 15-year lens, how do you assess the changing of the attitudes of the philanthropic world towards water, and particularly something that is relatively esoteric, I would argue sophisticated in terms of the impact outcomes. It's not like we're going to go and build a well and everything's going to be hunky-dory until we have no plan for the maintenance of that well and it breaks. What you're promising in terms of an impact engine is sophisticated, and it requires a kind of a leap of understanding beyond what you would usually categorize as kind of like a philanthropic or a destination for philanthropy. So again, like over time, how have you seen people cottoning on to your argument, basically?
I think that that's been one of our challenges is we have I think a pretty sophisticated approach, and to understand the impact really requires, a donor, if they're, putting money into this, to not only understand the organization and what we're doing, but really understand the field of play and how all this is an arc, and we're trying to change that, put a dent in that. So I think that has limited us in some ways in terms of what we can raise. I do think that that's changing with tools like the Water Innovation Pilot Fund, where we can really have that if-then statement and create an outcome that you can measure and see. But yeah, I think to the earlier point, though, it's still the majority of water philanthropy dollars, if you will, do go internationally, and for good reason, to base a pyramid and wash solutions that really need this. Domestically, I think it's interesting to say, you look at Paul O'Callahan's work in describing the different kinds of innovation in water, and seeing that philanthropy is not that different in water. So there's crisis-driven philanthropy. There's very kind of geography-driven philanthropy that might be more kind of threshold or value-driven, just trying to improve what's being done. So I think there's some really interesting similarities. At the same time, clearly there's a lot of money in the climate philanthropy world. And there was a time when I'd walk in the doors of a foundation and they say, what you're doing is adaptation. That's for the future. We're just interested in mitigation. See you later. But clearly that's not an option anymore. And I think donors are becoming more sophisticated and realizing, hey, we can't look at these communities and say, once we get the mitigation thing down, we'll come back and save your water resources. We've got to do both.
That's taken care
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, back to my numbers point, but I think we've made a case, or there is some decent math out there suggesting that if you're serious about mitigation, there's some really interesting plays in decarbonizing the water sector. And what we often think are these very fragmented spaces. Well, if you just look at some of those really large wastewater treatment centers in major cities, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of GHGs there that you can tackle. So I think that that's where philanthropy...
12% of California's energy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I think that philanthropy in our space is changing. I also think that we've learned through some of our ocean donors that it's like, why are you talking to us? Well, 80% of the ocean's waste comes from poor wastewater and stormwater management. So maybe we've been out in the ocean trying to clean up the garbage patch, but all this crap comes from somewhere. Let's look at wastewater. I think health funders are doing the same. We're poisoning people on a mass scale. Absolutely. If you're looking at arsenic poisoning in Bangladesh, or you're thinking about Flint, there's a lot more as a health funder that you might be doing in water in the future.
Absolutely. The symptoms of lead poisoning behaviorally look almost exactly like, whether you want to call it ADHD or like whatever it is, and basically an inability to function. And the way in which we deal with it is we give them the detention and then we throw them out of school. What is going on? I'm so glad that you made that connection, because it really is much more than like, we would like to preserve the gallons. We need to preserve the gallons. Of course we do. We need to preserve the gallons. But if you are in gender, if you're looking at economic equity, if you're looking at racial equity, if you're looking at health, if you're not looking at water, you are tying yourself in knots, dealing with often like the symptoms rather than the cause. If you don't get water sorted, you can't do all the rest of it. Okay, climb down off that soapbox. So,
well, I think kind of like you see in the investment space, this is hard. And I think philanthropies are getting to that same point too. So as you like to say, Tom, happy days, ahead of us. I mean, there's a lot of tough stuff ahead of, whether you're an investor or a philanthropist in this space. At the end of the day, some of the challenges that we're looking at are, it's a crisis in governance, not the water resource itself. There's no amount of innovation or improved management plans that are going to solve something that's really a governance issue. So it's really hard to think about creating and financing and maintaining reliable infrastructure in unincorporated community. I hear through various sources that domestic water philanthropy is actually shrinking right now. I think that will come back, but I think that's a bit of a reflection of people have put some real money through grants to work in this space and not seeing maybe the same amount of results that they would see in other spaces.
Interesting. Well, in terms of the practical application of this technology, I mean, one of the things that I just loved that you're into now is actually the financial supporting of pilots. So building physical proof points out there in the world. So this work on the implementation side. So walk us through it. Like, what does this look like and how does it fit into your kind of theory of change for the entrepreneur and by extension, the impact of their work?
I might reflect on some really early points that were happening around us that I knew were happening, but I think certainly pointed us in this broader direction towards supporting pilots. I mean, one was WaterSmart Software. They actually took on a grant from the Water Foundation that paid for a pilot that validated their solution. It was a behavioral economics and consumer engagement solution, not unlike what O-Power had done in the energy sector. But there they were walking around, you knew plenty of utilities would use it. And even though they had good backing at the time from investors, they really didn't have that money to go do a pilot. And then pilot worked. They had great results. They used those results to go and sell. So that was one point for me. It also felt like more of the investors that were talking to us to say, this is a great founder, great solution. You see why I would invest in this, but what are the customers saying? Who would actually pay for this? How many customers are out there like that? So I think there was a kind of series of signals like that. Then it was really Cape Town that happened. And that was the genesis behind the Urban Water Solution or Urban Water Challenge, where we had two donors that were really passionate about what was happening in Cape Town and other coastal communities in day zero and saying, okay, we'd like to do a prize, but we don't just want to give out a cash award. We really want it to be putting ideas into action. So that led us towards this path. And we've been funding pilots since 2018 now. We've learned a lot. But then last year, we stood up this new fund with support from the Coca-Cola Foundation and Oceankind, through which we are now able to provide recoverable grants as well as loans to support pilots in communities and markets that need innovation the most. So a bit of it is about supporting direct solutions and creating outcomes, but there's also almost an access to innovation story here that we're really excited about. Because if you just think about, okay, obviously all the venture-backed companies in our space are going to go towards the big markets where they can go big. But there are some really interesting underserved markets that represent real impact opportunities, but also market opportunities. And I think that's the kind of work that we'll be able to do with this fund.
So for the benefit of the companies who may be listening to that being like, oh my God, first funding, this sounds amazing. Can you just walk us through, I mean, you may need to delete the names or whatever it is, just like an example of how this works kind of from beginning to end when Imagine H2O's like funding comes in, just like the actual kind of like the structuring of this overall, because the devil as ever is in the kind of the details and understanding where this comes in, what it unlocks, like what does it rip out of the system that needs to not be there in order to kind of smooth this path to those crucial first proof points for the companies. It would just be great to take us a layer deeper.
When you put out a press release saying, hey, we've launched this pilot fund, we get ideas and emails from everyone in the under the sun, which is expected.
Right out of the woodwork.
We're not closed from that, but I think what we're seeing is, hey, we actually need to de-risk the team and the financial model, everything through our accelerator programming first, before we say, here's $100,000 and go do a pilot. So there's a process here that I think is unfolding that a lot of this is about, okay, have they gone through our programming? Are we really comfortable in what they're doing? And, we don't force a marriage here. We're not saying, hey, you're a great company. You have to go do this pilot in Boise, Idaho, because we like Boise. No, we really want the entrepreneurial process to guide it. So they have to select the customer. They have to start that conversation with the customer. And we need to see evidence that this is for real, because we could write a check, the entrepreneur could be excited, but if there's really kind of no one at the utility that can sign off or oversee the pilot, then it's kind of dead on arrival. So you need to make sure that those kind of partnerships and conditions are there, because success is the pilot works, the customer turns around and buys the solution. But especially some of the work that we're doing internationally with partners like the Asian Development Bank is, they want to then be able to share with their other clients about, hey, this is possible. Here, there's a whole solution set that's emerging here, and you ought to know about it. So there's a lot on the back end on kind of education with other utility leaders that has to happen. And that's not just going to happen if you think about one project to another. It's got to be a more systemic approach to the whole problem.
Yeah, I'm not just doing this domestically. You went, I suppose, we went like international, like remarkably early and remarkably effectively. We're putting kind of Imagine H2O Asia in process. Like, how do you think about the sort of the overall like edifice and the internationalization of the organization? Because you've got two really, really strong bases of strength. What does that feel like? And what was that process like?
We'd actually had some very early conversations, I think as early as 2010 with Singapore PUB. They had some folks come out to one of our events in San Francisco, and we just had been in touch. And, everyone thinks of it as a hydro hub, but I think we saw an opportunity to go over there and not just work in Singapore, but really use that as a base to think regionally and look around as, there's a large percentage of the world's population is in this region. It's a fairly young population. These are folks that, when they walk into work, they expect innovation, those tools to exist. They don't want to be looking at, screens that look like Ataris and then have a smartphone in their pocket. So I think it's been a fascinating region to move faster, to test some different business models. Sometimes we're seeing very similar technologies and businesses being built in that region that we're then seeing in North America. And sometimes people say, well, they're competitors. There's enough kind of leaking pipes in the world.
Yeah. It's okay.
There's a real value in building out a localized business first and focus on what you know and the relationships you have before you think about spanning another continent.
Yeah.
It's been a really awesome experience. I have to pinch myself when I'm riding an elevator at a PUB building in Singapore, and there on the little video screen is an interview with Anna Marie on our team, and that we have, I think, a really special relationship with the sector there that really puts a lot of its strengths to play for us and the entrepreneurs that we work with.
It's super exciting. I missed the last Water Week in Singapore. Steve and Christine got to go, which I'm very jealous about. But it has been amazing to watch the kind of the international footprint as well. So just going on to your own entrepreneurial process, one of the key things is hiring decisions. You actually have kind of an amazing track record, like present company excluded very much, but Ivy Nguyen, who is on investment committee. Obviously, you've got, Nimesh, who arrived at about the same time as me and it was way better for way longer. You've got Kelly, Sonoria, Nidhi, Taylor, Anna Marie, as you just mentioned. How do you think about talent identification? Because you're really good at it. And so I just like invitation to wax lyrical about whether it's the identification, what you look for, how you keep people around, because they really do. I mean, I was there for 5.5 years, much to your chagrin, I'm sure. You've just done a really good job.
Oh, we'll have you back, Tom, anytime.
So how do you think about it?
Well, one of my mentors that I have spent a lot of time with, who worked in the credit card business and then was really instrumental behind Bridgespan Consulting, he had to remind me, hiring, in most cases, it's a 50-50. number. Yeah. And that's pretty scary.
Well, not for you. Anyway, but Karen,
For me, obviously not everything's going to be a fit, but I think, we take our time. I think that can be frustrating for candidates, but it's so important to get it right. Absolutely. And I think, we've got a great track record here. And I think for us as an organization, everything we're about, this isn't a steady state. It can't be 20 people that are here for perpetuity. I take real pride in what you're now doing. Thinking about Kelly now at Aqualateral,
for real.
What Ivy's doing, now Taylor's now off to an H2O company.
The Dortmund House.
there's an ecosystem piece to this of bringing new talent into this space, giving them the know-how and the connections and visibility to build a real career in water, whether that's with Imagine H2O or outside of us. That's all in line with what we're trying to do as an org and creating an impact in the space.
For sure. So it would be remiss of me as we come sort of towards the end of our time together not to ask you about where you think this whole situation is going. We're sort of speaking on January the 30th. It's been a tricky week or so for people in the climate side of things, with the pausing of funding and then a just totally different attitude from this administration from the previous one. But I think one of the things that's always given me quite a lot of comfort about water is that there seems to be a very clear distinction. When people ask us about, are you worried about what's happening? I'm like, they didn't give us anything in the first place. Like, what are they going to do? Give us less? Okay, fine. Oh, yes, we've had some pretty sort of large pieces of legislation that have come our way. I don't want to be ungrateful. But it's not like of the 1.4 trillion or whatever it was, we got, I don't know, maybe 12 billion, depending on what you're looking at. And most of that was to kind of ag, but was a little bit esoteric. So I feel like we're insulated, but I'm curious as to whether you share that point of view. And what do you feel like the next kind of, where are we headed? How would you want other people to think about the water opportunity? And what do you think the people who want to get involved in the water opportunity should look out for? Where do you think the danger signs are?
That's definitely a crazy week. Just a few hours ago, I was telling colleagues, we got to map out every dollar that would have been allocated to water that's now frozen or off limits and what that means for issues that people really care about.
Absolutely.
And I think that there was going to be a really interesting communications exercise that we would have witnessed where Senate Republicans were going to then have to claw back certain projects and loans, but in different frames than what we often think about in the water sector. So obviously that didn't happen. And everything I was thinking is out the window, but I think it was pretty safe to say that a lot of the messaging would have been about water as a national security issue. I think there are some real DoD interests in domestic water management from flood to drought. I think clearly people think about food prices right now. That would have come into play. And then economic development and opportunity, especially around AI. We can look to nuclear to power these centers, but there is no nuclear equipment for water to produce the amount of water that they need. So I think that although it felt very scary, and I certainly was getting calls and messages from people that thought their organizations or their companies were done. Fortunately, they've been saved. But I do think we're going to have to really think more about the framing of these issues. And I think the reality is water is not as polarizing as climate. We do see some ways where it can be made, people can polarize it. But in general, even some of the staffs that I've been talking with on the Republican side recently, there's a mutual interest in managing the resource better, creating jobs, creating opportunity, but looking at insurance and housing and food. And you can't look into the future and not be concerned about what's happening to our water resources.
Exactly. I just see nothing changes. It's like, okay, well, everything that was true 2 weeks ago is exactly as true now. This is a multi-decade megatrend because there just is too much. There's too much work to do. And then, it's like Mae Stevens' episode with us, she pointed out the track record of voting within the houses on water issues. And it's one of the last pieces of bipartisan subject matter really left. So I'm certainly not worried, but who knows what will happen next week, I guess.
Who knows?
All right.
Who knows? Let's talk about the transfer window instead, Tom.
Yes. I was thinking, how have we got through all of this without me making derogatory comments about Emi Martinez and generally sort of burgeoning Villa, Arsenal dislike of each other? But Ollie Watkins might be a player for us quite soon. And we'll see what happens in the next, I guess 48 hours. Scott, we've come to the end of our time together. I've been looking forward to this for a really long time. And thank you so much. I kind of owe this career that I love and feel privileged to be able to do to the fact that you took a chance on me in 2015, which anybody who knew me in 2015 knows that was quite a big chance to be taking. And so I'm so appreciative. But, when in years to come, and even now, if people were to put up the Water Hall of Fame and the people who have done the most for the development of entrepreneurship, early stage companies, technology, and impact within the water sector, not only in the US, you really would be one of the first photos on that wall. So I just want to heartily congratulate you. But you've got one more question to answer. Don't think you're done.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Yes.
So our final question to all of our guests, if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
I'll be a little bit controversial, but hear me out. Look, I think you got to be realistic about the 10 to 15 year journey when everything goes right. So it's going to be longer than that. I do think entrepreneurs really need to think about when they take on dilutive capital and why, and try to delay that as much as possible. I think there are more resources that are non-dilutive than there were a few years ago. Now, if all federal funds are frozen, that's out the window. But let me just say that as of today, I do think there are more resources available and coming online for entrepreneurs. That said, when you really go into growth mode, you are going to have to look at taking on equity. And I think we've seen a lot of different investors in the space. Some come and go. Some have what they think is a thesis, and then they're done a few years later. So I think, in a long story short, is take the check from people that really know the space. And I think, Tom, what you built as a fund and the people involved, I can't think of a better kind of group of advisors for entrepreneurs. And if you're going to, again, measure things in burritos,
yes,
I think you're getting a lot of value. You're getting a lot of value out of burritos at Burn Island Ventures. I hear it from the companies we work with. Obviously, we have a closer tie with our alumni now. Many of them are now in your portfolio, and you just kind of hear the stories about what you've been able to do for some of those companies, and it's really impressive.
Well, I appreciate you. Scott, you are a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been long overdue that you joined us on the Fundamental Molecule, but I'm so glad you did. You have an absolutely excellent one, and I'll see you soon, okay?
All right, Tom. Thank you so much.
Cheers, sir.